Well, thank you all so much for spending some time with us today. My name is Jess Ray, and I work with clients and associations to figure out how we can best support their culture initiatives. And welcome to today's webinar. Building Workplace Self Awareness, which is an intro to DISC behavioral styles. I am joined with the one and only Alayna Thomas, who is a workforce and Gen Z strategist here at Magnet Culture. And what I think is really cool, drum roll, she was recently named the 2024 keynote speaker to follow by USA Today. So congratulations, Elena. We're
Thanks,
so excited
Jess.
to have you a part of the Magnet team. I know you've been here for a while, but I just really love working with you. Hey, today in our discussion on self-awareness in the workplace, we're going to talk all about DISC, which is the universal language of observable human behavior. And it's essentially, which means it's how you do what you do. So today's webinar, we will include diving into why team members show up so differently, exploring the dynamics of team interactions, and discovering ways to adjust your communication style. Remember that all of our webinars are available. I'm going to put this in the chat at magnetculture.com/webinars. You can check out this year's past webinars and don't forget to subscribe so that you can on our YouTube channel so you can rewatch those. Little nugget, we've got some folks will actually take those webinars and use them as like lunch and learn training. So it's a great way to just keep that culture conversation going. Today's webinar playback will be available just in a few days at that same page if you want to share that out to different leaders or other folks you're connected with. And as questions come to mind, please use the chat. We want to make sure that we answer all your questions when it comes to this particular topic. There's a Q&A box that you can find that bottom at the that button at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions in that if you'd like, and we'll make sure that we address those. So be sure to stay for the entire session. We do have a special offer for those of you on today's live call. But before we dive in, I just want to tell you a little bit more about my speaking partner today. Alayna Thomas is truly wise beyond her years Gen Z professional who has already earned her master's in management, her HR professional designation from SHRM. She teaches at UT Dallas. And when she's not on the road speaking and training our Magnet Culture clients on how to reduce turnover, Alayna is doing all kinds of fun hobbies that she loves to enjoy, including her little cat that we love to watch walk across that screen. Alayna and I have been working hard this year to extend our award-winning generational programs to now include Gen Z, and our association and corporate partners are booking her really left and right. I get phone calls at least once a week to ask for Alayna for their fall 2025 conference or fall conferences this year and 2025 programs for next year. So if you have any holds that you need me to put on a calendar, now's the time to ping me, Jess at magnetculture.com. I'm really excited for this conversation. So let's go ahead and dive in. So, Lena, I'll let you kick it off for us.
Yes, awesome. Well, I mentioned this at the very beginning. We are doing a bit of a series on self-awareness. So Kara Soletto, our founder, chief retention officer, and I talked, gosh, a little bit over a month ago about why self-awareness is important, really why it matters to leaders. This is really fundamental for the work that we do at Magnet. We believe that we have to be aware of ourselves and others in order to adapt and to better lead today's new workforce. So it all ties into what you hear us talking about a lot. But one of the things we did was we mentioned some of these different tools for self-awareness. And one of those is DISC. So we're talking today about DISC, which is this universal behavioral language about how we do what we do. It is different than others that might talk a little bit more about our motivation. This one is truly our how. And a fun fact about DISC is actually through research, we found that it is pretty much set in stone from when you're 5 years old, unless you have a major life event that happens. And quite honestly, we've all had some major life events that have happened. So if you have took your disc maybe 5+ years ago, you might have gone through something pretty big since then, and it would be worth taking again. So for those of you that have done disc before, I would love if you could just drop in the chat what your disc style is. It's DISC, and I promise for those of you that are like, I'm here to learn about disc, we will briefly talk about what disc is too. But I would just love to see that. Usually you'll start seeing people have usually two, one or two primary. You got a primary and a secondary. So that's why we're seeing a couple in the chat. I will tell
Oh, that's so
you that I'll tell you one thing, my height, which is not a surprise to anyone. My primary is high I, which is very people driven. If you couldn't figure that out from just looking at me or hearing me talk, now you know, another not so well kept secret.
I love that, Alayna. And I'm right there with you. I'm also admittedly a high I
What?
myself. And I am a huge fan of DISC. I've always just found it so fascinating. And I even revisit my report about once a quarter just to remind myself of some things to be aware of. And I think what's interesting and maybe where we can kick it off at is if, before we dive into DISC, let's talk about why you think this is important.
Yeah. I don't know if this is recent or if this has just always been the case and we're finally realizing it, but people are really judgy, and especially at work. I mean, we've got increased divisiveness. It's leading to a lot of team conflict, not very great communication, and honestly, just not knowing how to work together. And especially for our people out there who struggle with retention, you are having unnecessary turnover because of all this conflict and what your workplace culture is like. And the solution here, gosh, I know you can't quite see them. I have a stack of books right now that I am reading, trying to understand, how do we solve this? How do we fix this judginess? And the key message through all of these is that a little bit of human understanding goes such a long way. I'd love to share a little story to protect the innocent or not so innocent. I will change names, but I promise this is a true story. So early in my career, it was actually my one of my first jobs on a big team. I had an immediate coworker that I can't explain it any other way than we were just complete opposites. I'm going to call her Maria. And Maria, high achiever, one of the best in the business, constantly promoted for her ability to get things done. And me too, for different ways, constantly just able to see how people interact with one another. And again, that high I, very high people side. And we just had months and months. At this point, we were probably working together for 8 months in direct partner roles. We worked together every single day, probably about 5 out of our 8+ hours a day. And it just felt like we were not talking the same language. And to me, that's very hard. I really want everyone to be on the same page. It's something that I value a lot. And I wanted to believe the best in Maria. I wanted to believe that we were working towards the same things, but it was just hard to believe that. And it took probably, what was I saying? We were working together for months at that point. It took until the 1.5 year mark of this kind of secret, not talked about tension for us to finally realize that we just valued different things. We had different approaches. The way that we did things was different. And so it wasn't that we were working against each other. We just were going about it a different way. And I just wish I had had the disc language then to be able to have the conversation around what made us so different. If we had had that, it would have been easier. Because here's the thing, these conversations are so hard to have organically, right? What am I going to do? Come into work. Hey, Maria, so I noticed we've had a little bit of tension and I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. So it must be you. Can you explain that to me? No, that's not helpful. But if I had been able to maybe do the disc assessment with her and we could have sat down and looked and said, hey, I think you're a high D and I'm a high I, and I'm actually a little bit of a lower D in that measure. And so I think this is where attention is coming from. So that is really how that little human understanding, oh my gosh, once we had that conversation, the rest of our time together felt like working with a different person, but we were the same people. And we have clients who really come to us with a lot of these same problems. And I have a lot of peers of mine who ask me, Alayna, how do I work through this? And I really try to encourage everyone to just ask questions, get to know the people across from you. And we have some people where DISC as a whole has become the language and the tool that they've used to solve a lot of these problems.
Yes, that's so true. And I think that we have had so many clients who have grabbed on to that DISC assessment in particular and have infiltrated it from every which direction. And I've got a great example I'm excited to share with you guys today. But I think what's important is that sometimes we also have clients who come to us and they have doubts. They're
Mhm.
like, I did an
Yep.
assessment. I did it 5 years ago. I did it 10 years ago. I'm good. Or I don't like to be a purple giraffe or the circle or whatever. There's so many different assessments.
Yeah.
So I think where one thing that I am because of my style, I always want to know why. And so, Elena, can you tell us a little bit about like why TTI disc assessment? Why is that the one that Magnet uses to help with this particular piece?
Yeah. So I actually teach this. You mentioned that I teach HR, and one of our chapters, we talk about reliability and validity. It's very important. And for my data people out there, you know what those words mean, but it has to do with the fact that we're measuring things that actually matter and have been proven to be related to the thing that we're asking. So they're related and they matter. And that is what TTI Success Insights is, the group that we use. They really have proven that reliability and validity, but also it's not just a 5-minute test. And some people might really prefer a 5-minute test, but it's more in depth. I think it took me about 20 minutes. And it gives you like this 20-page report after. And like you said, Jess, I go back and reference that report too. It's almost a personal development plan. And I will show a couple of those pages of the report to all of you here in just a minute. Anything else you'd add?
No, I think that's perfect. And I agree with you. I think that it's something certainly to revisit. I do like a couple warnings. I know clients have come to me and said, well, I took the free version on online. It was 5 minutes. I'm like, you have to be very careful about that particular assessment because it's not going to give you the in-depth questioning that a full-on assessment will have you answer. Like Elena said, the assessment that we have our clients take for our trainings, or if you're DISC certified and you run those trainings, it takes like at least 15 to 20 minutes. They actually require you to be like in a quiet space, uninterrupted. Like let's take a couple breaths and get into the assessment because it does make a difference on how those responses are collected. So great share out, Elena. And I just recently spoke with a client, Julie Hess. We actually got a kind of a quote from her for this particular session, but she just grabbed onto this and ran with it. And I just think that what she's done with her organization, they're not only using it with their executive team and their managers, they're using it for onboarding so that their managers can understand their new hires. And we've had another engineering firm that we worked with years ago. They also used it and ran with it. And you can just see the ripple effects that are happening. Just like Elena said, what if you already had a language bank coming
Mhm.
in? Working with people who are new, who are different from you. So I'd like to just point out and highlight some of what Julie's quote here says, but essentially from Julie Hess, VP of HR at Master Spas, she says, quote, DISC has truly transformed how we communicate and understand each other across departments. It fills in the gaps and answers the question about why we see things differently. If we go down to the end there, that last paragraph, I just love this part. She says, the most rewarding part has been seeing people apply what they've learned, not only here in the office, but in their personal lives as well. They're recognizing why communication can sometimes be a challenge, and DISC is helpful in better understanding people from all perspectives. And that makes all the difference. And I'm right there with you. We actually had a conversation internally about how DISC has helped communicate with my husband and my kids. And so it's just this kind of learning that can be so foundational that really can grow throughout your organization if you so choose to use that. So Elena, I know that you're DISC certified. trained our clients on behavioral styles. So, those of you who don't quite know what DISC means, can you give an overview, and then that way folks can help draw some lines?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a visual learner. And since I have a slide up, I'm going to show you another slide from our other visual learners out there. I hope I don't go too much into professor mode. But this little, gosh, what is this called? Quadrant. It's a quadrant. This quadrant really helps me out. So you can see here, we've got these two axes of task-oriented versus people-oriented, and then fast-paced versus slow-paced. And I know, Jess, you were talking about, how this helps you at home. I will say that I think our pets might also even embody some of this. My cat's a little bit more slow-paced and task-oriented. I will tell you maybe a little bit of a high C, but what does that even mean? So this is meant, first and foremost, I just want to say this one more time in case you missed it before. This is meant to be a universal language, and it's meant to be a neutral language. So there are some words that do develop a positive or negative connotation. For example, if you are in a heavy, a fast-paced growth workplace, then it's going to be higher value for that company that you might be a high D or I, dominance or influence. So some people start to form opinions on whether or not one of these is good or bad, but it's not about that. Really, all of these are neutral and can be used in a very positive way in the workplace. So our D for dominance, these are task-oriented, fast-paced individuals who respond to problems and challenges in a unique way. I'll talk about that on the next slide. Then we've got I, very people-oriented and fast-paced. This group cares a lot about people and contacts, how we interact with others. Pace and consistency are key for our high S, which are people-oriented, a little bit slower paced. This group might be a little bit more hesitant about change. And then our final one, procedures and constraints, is very important to our compliance group, which is a little bit more slow-paced and task-oriented. So let me tell you a little bit more about that language here. Whenever you take an assessment with TTI, it gives you a graph that looks something like this. How do you actually read that graph? Well, I'm about to show you a report that talks all about, really breaks that down. But at a high level, for dominance, you just heard me say, I said high C, high I, high D. What does that mean? It's this spectrum. So higher is going to be closer on the top of that graph. So you can see here in the green, if you're able to see, it's the third bar from the right for anyone who might be color deficient. But that one, this graph shows someone with a high S versus this person also has a low D, low dominance. So dominance is this range of agreeable to assertive when it comes to these problems and challenges. Someone that is more assertive is going to be someone who really wants bullet points, time is money, trying to get things done, business first. Someone that's a little bit more agreeable would be the opposite in handling those problems and challenges. Then we've got our influence group. This goes from maybe skeptical to optimistic when it comes to people and contacts. I am one of these. Jess is one of these. So the way to our heart is to put people first. But if someone is high D, it's not that they don't care about people. The task at hand is going to be more important, right? That task-oriented, people-oriented. Then our S, steadiness, really is a mix of entrepreneurial or lots of change. I love when things change a lot, to high steadiness, as it's indicated in the name, wants a little bit more predictability. Also, this group really needs a lot more time to process. So are we building in time for people to process more? When you put someone that is high S and low S together, how they approach change and a change management plan is going to look very different and can lead to some communication breakdown. And finally, we've got our compliance group. Our high Cs are very exacting, heavy on compliance, and then lower Cs are a little bit more unsystematic. I might even add rock the boat, like thinking new ways. You might have the important way to make a low C feel valued is going to be let them bring new ideas to the table and implement them. That's going to be really hard if you've got a manager of your team that's very high C How do they help a low C feel encouraged and valued? So you can start to see how these interact with one another. Can I share a little bit about the report, Jess? Would that be okay?
Oh, yeah, that would be
Okay.
fantastic because I think this is where, like, as they say, the meat and potatoes of
Yeah.
what this is. Some people think, oh, it's just I get this cool graph. It's so much more in depth than that. And when I'm speaking with clients about the importance of DISC, this is where I point them to. So I'm glad you're bringing up those little nuggets there, Elena.
Yeah, absolutely. So y'all, this is like a 20+ page report. We don't have time to cover a 20+ page report, nor do you probably care about that. So let me show you my two absolute favorite pages. You might have different favorites, and that's totally okay. And also, if you want to know my secrets, this is technically my report. So if you want to like zoom in, you can learn a little bit more about me, but also you can just ask because I'm a high I and I love to talk. So this first page is about behavioral characteristics. This is the summary that is usually a big aha moment for people who take it because they go, oh my gosh, this really applies to me. But one thing here is this is the start of the conversation in the report. So if we were to work together and look at the report, I would tell you that it's okay to go through and edit. Read this. What really stands out? What doesn't feel so accurate? And maybe what you feel isn't so accurate, other people around you might say, yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. So that's like the best way to use this tool is to start these conversations. So that is the first, and you can see very bottom corner is my graph because that's not the main focus of this page. The main focus is about the behavior that shows up, and then it goes into the graph a little bit more on some others. And then from a manager perspective, most of our managers love this page. There's actually multiple pages for this. It's the checklist for communicating. So remember how I said that me and Maria it felt like we were working opposite of each other. Oh my gosh, if we had had this checklist, I would have been like, oh, when I am leading the conversation, talking about people and feelings and impact, that is not working with what she cared most about, which was about what is the outcome and what is the maybe a little bit more of the metric here and the impact to the business. If I had known ways to communicate with Maria, we would have had a lot less conflict. I really believe that. And we eventually found that just without this tool. Leaders love, I mean, if I look at this really quick, for me, one of the best ways to interact with me is to provide me a little bit more clarity on yes and no answers, not maybe. I don't do great with this ambiguity, but of course we can all adapt in these ways. So those are a couple of my absolute favorites. Now, there's also this great thing that if you take this with your whole team, then you actually can get all of your team results on one view. And I have to highlight our director of marketing who created the most beautiful team wheel for us. And I promise you get one with TTI too. But this is a little bit of the secret behind the Magnet Culture team. This is all of us on the team that aren't trainers. We also have some phenomenal trainers. We just didn't get them on here for today. But you can see from looking at this wheel now what some strengths and weaknesses or gaps might be. If we as a team, you can see a little bit of a gap in that upper right quadrant. That's not a bad thing, but we need to be aware that we aren't a team of really high D assertive individuals. We're a little bit less assertive, a little bit more agreeable. And so we might have to ask different questions to get to the root of what everyone's thinking. You also will notice on here, I'm not going to go into it today, but reach out to us if you want to learn more on, we all have a natural style as well as an adapted style. And when those two things are very different, that also is a great opportunity for a manager and their individual on their team, sorry about that, to talk about why they are operating in such a different way than their natural style. For some people, this even helps rearrange the talent on their team. So just some quick observations here. You get one that looks very similar if you do the team report that also just comes out, everyone takes it, and then you get this team report too. And I want to show one more thing about the team report. One of the favorites for individuals, mainly for leaders, is you saw there on that last slide. Let me go back one more actually. There's these names for each of the quadrants on the circle. And each of those have very distinct characteristics. Again, this is about behavior. And so you can actually see by having your individuals in these different quadrants, what that looks like on your team. So for this specific client, this is a sample report here, but you can see the strengths and weaknesses and the task-oriented and people-oriented and language that works for your team. So this report is excellent for showing all of that. Jess, do you have any more? I know that not Jess, Julie Hess, sorry, going back to that. Julie Hess has really used this on her team. Have you seen any other success stories from other clients who have used this?
Absolutely. So think about all the different groups of teams that you have within your organization. Maybe you have, like, it's your department, it's your leadership team, it's all your staff. What would it look like if you had someone was handing you a report of how certain people on your team work really well together?
Mm.
And furthermore, how certain people on the team may have different challenges. If you were handed that report as a leader and you're able to say, okay, John, Joe, and Sally, they're going to work really well together, but these other groups of people, there's going to be some challenges. So, what can I do as a leader to get in front of that?
Mm.
And that's what those team reports allow you to do, is really figure out how to best facilitate a working relationship with your team. So, just to kind of pull back a little bit, the first step of that team report is, first of all, you got your group together. And Lisa, this could answer your question too. When you get your group together, that's the best way that we see facilitating a training like this. Magnet Culture doesn't do one-on-one debriefs with people who are interested in taking their disc. Instead, what we found is more effective
Mm.
is we get your team together, whether it's your leaders or even your department, and everyone takes that assessment. We set up a training, whether it's virtual or an in-person workshop, and then we deep dive into the different styles that Alayna had just really scratched the surface on.
Yeah,
And then we're going
going
to be
quick.
looking at our reports and identifying things that will make us a more effective individual on that team, or on the management leadership group, etc. And then the next step would be that team report. So now we understand our personal behavioral styles, and we're starting to identify the behavioral styles of the team we work with. Then we put all those assessments together in a team report. And that's kind of like DISC 2.0, if you will. And so that's like a separate training that our facilitator would come in and go through that team report, talk about different dynamics and how people can work better together.
Yeah. I forgot to say this earlier, but just to talk about that I'm certified in DISC. And so if you're like, I am loving this, that if you are getting very excited about this, you can get certified in DISC and we can help you do that. So I will tell you, it is kind of an online course. There's interactive components, and then a test at the end, you got to pass. But once you're certified, you actually can help lead your teams to understand this. We want to equip you because we might not always be the best resource for you, right? We completely understand that. So you actually could become certified and we can help give you the tools to lead this on your teams. So especially for my HR people out there, because I'm HR and I love teaching this stuff, it can be hard to be like, oh, I'm going to have someone else come teach this, because you love teaching your employees and you know them really well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. If you stay to the end, we'll mention how you can get all certified.
Awesome. That's so fantastic. And I'm excited about that piece, Lane. I don't know if I can wait to the end, but
I know,
but I
right?
do think there is a lot of power in that DISC certification. And really the trend that we see moving into 2025 is that now leaders know there's a workforce issue and they have to pour into it.
Mm.
Training is moved from, 5+ years ago, training was like, I don't know, it's kind of towards the bottom of the list. Training for leaders is now a top priority. And so Magnet Culture does give the option for either us to come in, or that DISC certification allows for you as the individual to have one-on-one
Mm,
debriefs with people
yeah.
within your organization, to have small group discussions. And so, more on this one piece that I'm very excited is going to kick off in 2025, but I'm so excited to roll that out. And so I do have a couple questions, Alayna.
Yeah.
The first one here, this is a good one. How might a Gen Z employee show their disc characteristics versus someone of another generation? Like, for example, how might like a high D Gen Z, say that fast 5 times, staff member behave differently than a high D Gen Xer? So, is there a relationship between the
Mm.
generations?
I'd love to even do some more research on this, but my initial impression is two things. So, first, I mentioned that this language is meant to be neutral, but what is deemed as positive or negative has really, I think, evolved with the workplace. So, I think that we talk about, if just a little Gen Z plug, we talk about how Gen Z brings their whole self to the workplace. And so I don't think it matters what quote letter they are, if you're thinking about these in terms of letters or behavioral style, whatever it is, they're going to bring it and they are going to talk about it like positively and excited. Like, this is who I am. You accept me who I am or you don't. And side note, we talk about this a lot. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to figure out really positive, maybe positive isn't the right word, really effective ways to guide and support our Gen Z, our younger hires who just have a whole lot of things to share and maybe not the best outlet or the tools to share those. I like to tell my students that, like, I totally hear where you're coming from. The delivery needs just a little bit of work, right? So I'm trying to help just guide there. And it's a little bit easier for me to say that because I'm also that cusper, pretty close in age to many of them. So that's one. They're whatever they are, they're going to bring it all. But the other is, I think that what has been deemed as acceptable has changed a little bit. And so I think it's a little bit rarer right now for me to see someone who's 18 to 26 that is very high in compliance or is high C. This group is a little bit, I don't, they're more, it's this new idea piece. It's this, the way it's always been done usually is very important to a high C. I don't think that's important, as important to our Gen Z. But I talk about this a lot. I don't want to give such a big generalization and say that every single person is in this category, but these are some of the trends that I'm seeing.
Great answer. Love that. Yeah, and I think that's some really interesting perspective too, and really good question.
Yeah.
So I do have one other here that talks a little bit about like tips. So if we can leave with a couple like practical tips on how to keep in mind the varying styles of all the different people on your team. So when you interact with them on an occasion, like how to, it's a lot to remember, right? Like,
Yeah.
though luckily there's no four quadrants, there's just this spectrum that sometimes we have to remember. So do you have any suggestions on how we can keep in mind of those styles?
I think from the lens of communication is going to be the most bang for your buck, right? Because you're talking with your people all the time. And so for me, and I will tell you, I actually really want to get everyone on our team's disc report and that like ways to communicate page so I can reference those. But in the interim, right, if you're waiting for that, like me, one thing that I do is you use any app that you choose, but I use OneNote and it's just on my computer all the time. I can access it from my phone too. And I have a running list of those on our team and how they prefer to be communicated with. What I think I could even do better and expand that to what words really work or don't work with them. I think that's something that DISC provides us with that bank. But I will tell you right now that I know that for me, you can text me, you can chat me, you can email me, like anything works. For someone else on our team, only text or chat if it's urgent. So what happens is that person might care a little bit more about structure, right? And so there's a way, if you can put it in this structure, it works with my processes that I have as an individual, all of that. There are also some observable some trends between if you don't have someone who has taken disc, you can start to identify, oh, I think that person values that a little bit more based on the way that they move or the way that they talk. So we definitely, it provides that language too. I think communication is going to be the biggest key here. We start there. Actually, I'll tell you, even when we teach, we love when people take disc and communication classes with us because we can really marry those two together.
Mhm.
It makes it not this big hypothetical, but a very realistic piece. Um, yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I think one other idea that we had a client mention to us is um, after their team took the disc assessments and then a class was run, one of the HR leaders made little table tents so that everyone could put it on their desk. And if you work in a virtual world, you can probably get creative with putting different things on walls. But that way, when I would approach, John, I would know, oh, he's a high D, and I just need to kind of like get to the point and maybe not ask him how his grandkids are, right? Or if I'm going to talk with Tasha, she's a high I like me. And so we're going to talk about our weekend first before we talk about a project we're working on. So it's just one way to help kind of start the conversation off right. And I loved that that particular company put those little table tents on. Um, Latasha says, "Yep, exactly me." Right?
Yeah.
So they put the table tents on the desk. So when you approach that person, you can kind of glance down and be like, "Oh, okay, now I'm talking to a high I." I just thought
Yeah.
that was a great idea. And the last question. Oh, go ahead, Elena.
I
Go
thought of
ahead.
one more tip if I can
Yeah,
throw it
yeah.
in. I knew there was something
Please.
in there that I couldn't get out. Okay. So y'all, one of our trainers on our team, Carrie Murphy, big shout out. I learned so much from her all the time. She has this phenomenal thing that she does with disc. She has everyone on her team take it. And she structures her meetings differently and how she approaches meetings with disc in mind. So, she's got a lot of people on her team who are high D or high structure. That can also be a little bit more of your compliance, right? So, both of those more task oriented. She sets an agenda, she sends it out ahead of time. Okay. And she makes sure that she starts the meeting and ends it on time because huge pet peeve to those people who are a little bit more time oriented. Okay, but then she also knows that there are those people that really just love to talk, and she doesn't want to like take the beginning of the meeting to do all of that. So what she does, and she's in person, so this works really well for her. She swings by their offices before the meeting, 15 minutes before. She puts it on her calendar, and it's her time to go collect all of her talkers and to go talk on the way to the meeting. And then after the meeting, there's some people who are high S who really need a little bit more time to process. So she also builds in 15 minutes at the end of the meeting to sit in the room or to walk and talk with those who have some more questions afterwards. She also builds in time for if you have more questions, here's the exact way to ask them. I think that is so effective. And I've actually begun doing some of that with virtual meetings where I will build in, like me and Jess, gonna be a little bit hard for us to do a 30-minute meeting. Okay. We need like a 35-minute meeting or a 40-minute meeting. And so we change the way that we structure our meetings with one another. But I will tell you, Brandy, rockstar on our team, she and I can get through a 30-minute meeting in like 25 minutes because we just go about it differently. So I just wanted to provide that as another example. But Jess, back
Oh,
to you.
that's
I'm sorry, I
I
hijacked.
love that. No, no, no. I love that so much. I think it's just fantastic that somebody's taken that training, they're running with it, and they're incorporating it in their culture. It's not
Yeah.
just to check the box, I did my assessment, move on with my life. It's just another way to help with communication with between leaders and different staff members. I think that you're right. I forgot about that tip. Carrie is knocking it out of the park. I love that she does that. The last question is, how do I get DISC certified?
Mm,
And again, if you're interested in that, you can email jess@magnetculture.com. Happy to book some time with you to talk a little bit more about how you can become DISC certified and then the advantages of bringing that in-house as well. So just email me, jess@magnetculture.com. Happy to set aside some time. And Alayna, unless you have anything else, I'm happy to wrap up and just thank everybody for spending time with us today.
yeah, I
Excited to continue the
see.
conversation.
I see Anita just asked the question, how do we take classes? So I
Mm.
just want to throw out there, we offer like different lengths of time. Do you like virtual or in person? Do you only have 30 minutes, which we hope you have more than 30 minutes, or do you have like 3 whole days that you can spend? So if you want slides, taking classes, I think the best way for us to do this, just email Jess and we'll make sure that we have the slides and all of those things. So she can just quickly respond to you. So if y'all don't mind doing that, and we'll try to follow up too if we miss any emails from anyone.
No doubt. That sounds great. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.